Have you ever felt the pull of the unknown? That eerie, unsettling curiosity that tempts you to step into places long forgotten? The kind of places where time has stopped, where shadows whisper secrets, and where the air itself seems to hum with something unnatural? Tonight we take you into one such place, an abandoned mall, once a thriving hub of life and laughter, now a decayed skeleton of its former glory. But what happens when a group of friends dares to step inside? What horrors lie hidden in the silence? And most importantly, will they all make it out? Dare to journey with us into the darkness? Let me know in the comments. Would you explore an abandoned mall at night? Or would you turn back the moment the doors creaked open? Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more spine-chilling stories from Forever Wild Stories. Now, let's step into the shadows. The night air was thick, clinging to their skin like an invisible mist. Ciara adjusted her backpack, her fingers tightening around the straps as she glanced at her friends. Philip, always the daredevil, smirked as he held up his flashlight. Maya stood beside him, arms crossed, trying to mask the unease in her eyes. Richard, the skeptic of the group, rolled his shoulders and sighed. "This is a bad idea," he muttered, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Philip scoffed. "You always say that, and I'm always right." Merlin, the quietest of them, didn't say a word. He just stared at the mall's entrance, his dark eyes unreadable. The doors had long been shattered, their jagged edges framing a gaping void. The inside was pure darkness, untouched by the glow of the flickering streetlights outside. Ciara took a deep breath. "We're really doing this, huh?" Philip grinned. "We said we would, didn't we? Just a quick look inside, a little exploring, then we're out." "Famous last words," Maya muttered. The group stepped forward, their footsteps crunching against shattered glass and debris. The moment they crossed the threshold, a strange sensation washed over them. The air inside was different, heavier, colder. The abandoned mall stretched before them, a cavernous space swallowed in shadow. Rows of stores stood empty, their windows cracked or missing. Torn banners hung from the ceiling, their faded colors barely visible in the dim light. Philip's flashlight swept across the tiled floor, revealing long-dried stains that looked unsettlingly like blood, Maya whispered, stopping short. Richard shook his head. "Probably just rust. Or something else." Something creaked in the distance. The sound echoed through the empty halls, making the group freeze. "That was just the building settling," Ciara said, though she didn't quite believe it. Philip laughed, stepping ahead. "Come on, we'll check out the food court first." They moved deeper into the mall. Each step felt wrong, like they were being watched. Shadows twisted in the corners, shifting when no one was looking directly at them. A store sign dangled from its hinges, swaying slightly even though there was no wind. "This place is way creepier than I expected," Maya whispered. Richard stopped in front of a directory map, brushing dust off its surface. The once colorful guide was faded and peeling. What stood out most, though, was the thick, black marker scrawled across it. "Leave." The group exchanged uneasy glances. "Someone probably put that there to mess with people," Philip said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. A sudden noise shattered the silence, a sharp scraping sound, like nails dragging against metal. "What the hell was that?" Ciara whispered. Merlin finally spoke. "We're not alone." The flashlight beam jerked wildly as Philip spun toward the sound. It had come from the direction of a department store, its entrance swallowed in darkness. Maya grabbed Ciara's arm. "Let's go back!" But Philip was already walking toward the noise. "Philip, stop!" Richard hissed. But the daredevil wasn't listening. He stepped into the dark store, the shadows swallowing him whole. The others hesitated only a moment before following. The second they entered, the temperature dropped even further. The air smelled stale, thick with dust and something else, something rotten. Shelves stood like silent sentinels, their contents long looted or decayed. Clothing racks were overturned, mannequins scattered across the floor, their glassy eyes reflecting the flashlight beam. Ciara's breath caught as she spotted one mannequin in the back. Unlike the others, it was standing perfectly upright. "That wasn't there before," she whispered. Richard swallowed. Let's get out of here. Then, footsteps, not theirs. Something moved behind the racks. A breath, a whisper, then a giggle. Maya screamed. The flashlight flickered violently as Philip spun around. The mannequins. They weren't where they had been a second ago. One stood closer. Too close. Ciara grabbed Philip's arm. We need to leave. Now the giggling grew louder, distorting, twisting into something unnatural. The shadows shifted, stretching toward them. Then the lights blinked on. All at once, the mall was illuminated in a sickly, artificial glow. The escalators groaned to life, moving with no one on them. Store signs flickered, neon buzzing erratically. A child's voice rang out over the intercom, warped and static-filled. Play with us. Then the lights cut out. Darkness swallowed them whole. A second passed, then two. Ciara felt Maya gripping her arm like a vice. Then something cold touched her neck. She turned, but there was nothing there. Philip's flashlight flickered back on. Merlin's voice was calm, too calm. We need to go. Now. They turned and ran. The mall had changed. The entrance they came through was gone. The hallways twisted in unfamiliar ways. And behind them, something was following. Ciara's breath came in short gasps as she sprinted down the twisting corridors of the mall. The pounding of her heart drowned out everything except the echoing footsteps behind them. Heavy, unrelenting, growing closer. This isn't the way we came, Richard shouted, his voice tinged with panic. It doesn't matter, just keep running, Maya screamed. Philip's flashlight bounced wildly as he turned a sharp corner. The hallway ahead was a dead end, a collapsed ceiling, debris blocking their way out. No, no, no! Philip skidded to a stop, nearly slamming into the rubble. Ciara turned back, clutching Maya's hand. The thing behind them, whatever it was close. A slow, dragging sound filled the air, accompanied by a whisper. Stay with us. Then from the shadows, something stepped forward. It wasn't human. The figure was tall, unnaturally thin, its limbs stretched as if they had been pulled too far. Its face was a smooth, pale mask. No eyes, no mouth, just a blank void. Maya let out a strangled sob. What the hell is that? Philip grabbed a rusted metal pipe from the floor and swung it wildly. Back the hell off! The creature didn't flinch. Instead, it tilted its head, its empty face locking onto Philip. Then, it twitched. Not a step, not a movement. A jerking, unnatural snap that brought it inches closer. Then another. Closer. Philip lunged forward, swinging the pipe with all his strength. The creature vanished. The pipe whistled through empty air. Philip stumbled, nearly falling forward. Where the hell did it? A hand, cold, skeletal, wrong, gripped his ankle. Philip screamed. The others barely had time to react before he was yanked backward with impossible force, dragged into the darkness. His flashlight tumbled to the floor, spinning wildly. Philip! Ciara lunged forward, grabbing his arm. For a moment she caught a glimpse of his face, wide eyes, mouth open in a silent scream, before he was pulled into the shadows. Gone. Silence. Maya collapsed to her knees. No! 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 Richard ran forward, grabbing the fallen flashlight. He pointed it into the darkness where Philip had been dragged. Nothing. No blood. No trace. Just the whispering. One! Down! Ciara scrambled back, yanking Maya to her feet. We have to move! Richard clenched his fists, eyes darting around. Where? We're trapped! Merlin, still eerily calm, stepped forward. There's another way. They turned to him. His expression was unreadable, but he was already moving, walking along the edge of the collapsed wall, searching. How do you know? Richard demanded. Merlin didn't answer. Instead, he reached out and pushed. The wall groaned. Then it moved. A hidden door, once concealed beneath layers of grime and debris, swung open with a deep, echoing creak. The air behind it was even colder. Maya hesitated. What if that's where the thing came from? Ciara's voice was firm. It doesn't matter, we can't stay here. The whispering grew louder. 2, 3, more to go. Richard shuddered. We don't have a choice. One by one, they stepped through the hidden door. Inside the forgotten halls, the passage was narrow, the walls pressing close on either side. Dust filled the air, thick and choking. Their footsteps echoed too loud, as if the space itself was amplifying their presence. The flashlight's beam barely cut through the darkness. "I can't believe Philip's gone," Maya whispered, hugging herself. Ciara felt a lump in her throat. He had been reckless, sure, but no one deserved that. "We'll find him," Richard said. "We have to." But no one truly believed that. Merlin led them deeper, his movements precise, deliberate. "How did you know about this?" Ciara asked. Merlin finally stopped walking. "I've been here before." A heavy silence fell. "What?" Maya's voice was small. Merlin turned to face them, his expression unreadable. "This mall, it's wrong. It doesn't follow the rules of reality. I came here once, a long time ago. I barely made it out." Ciara's stomach twisted. "And you didn't think to mention that before?" "I thought it was just my imagination," he admitted. "But now I know it wasn't." Richard ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "So what does that mean for us?" Merlin's eyes darkened. "It means we're already trapped." As if on cue, the whispers returned. This time, they weren't coming from behind them. They were coming from ahead. A sharp, metallic noise echoed through the passage, something scraping against the walls. Then the flashlight flickered. In the brief moment of darkness, something moved. When the light stabilized again, Ciara's breath caught in her throat. Philip was standing at the end of the hallway. Maya gasped. "Oh my God, Philip!" He didn't move. His clothes were torn. His eyes were wide, unblinking. His mouth was slightly open, as if caught mid-scream. Richard took a hesitant step forward. "Philip?" No response. Ciara's blood ran cold. Something was wrong. Then Philip's head twitched. A slow, unnatural snap to the side. His body shuddered, then jerked forward too fast. Ciara grabbed Richard's arm. "That's not him." Maya shook her head, tears in her eyes. "No, it's him. He's alive. He—" Philip lurched forward, not walking, glitching. His limbs twisted unnaturally, his movements broken, distorted. Then he opened his mouth and screamed. Not a human scream, a distorted, layered shriek that sounded like 1,000 voices crying out at once. The walls shook. The flashlight died. Darkness swallowed them whole. Then, cold hands wrapped around Ciara's throat. Ciara's scream was strangled as icy fingers coiled around her throat, squeezing tighter with unnatural strength. Her hands shot up, clawing at the unseen grip. But there was nothing there, just an unbearable, crushing force. The darkness pressed in from all sides, suffocating, absolute. She kicked wildly, her boots scraping against the debris-strewn floor. A rush of panic flooded her veins as her lungs burned, desperate for air. Then, as suddenly as it came, the grip vanished. Ciara collapsed onto the cold, filthy tiles, coughing violently, sucking in ragged breaths. The flashlight flickered back on, the weak glow casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Ciara!" Maya dropped to her knees, grabbing her shoulders. "Are you okay?" Ciara shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. Something had me." Richard spun around, his own breath uneven. "Where's Philip?" They all turned. Philip was gone. Again. But the hallway wasn't empty. Standing where he had been was a figure. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its posture contorted as if its bones had been rearranged in ways that defied nature. It stood completely still, head tilted in an unnatural, bird-like manner. But its eyes were Philip's, wide, terrified, pleading. "Oh my God," Maya choked out, gripping Ciara's arm. Richard took a slow step backward. That's not possible." Merlin's voice was emotionless. "It's not him anymore." The creature moved, a sickening, twitching motion, like a marionette with its strings yanked too hard. Then the whispering began again. Not from it, from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. "Join us. Stay. Forever." The voices overlapped, distorted, wrong. Ciara's hands were trembling. The flashlight in Richard's grip shook as he aimed it at the creature. Philip's eyes blinked. "Help me." the creature whispered. But the voice wasn't his. It was layers of voices, stacked over each other, shifting in pitch. Then it lunged. They ran. The escalator of no return. Their footsteps pounded against the tile as they tore down the hallway. The whispers followed, rising into a chorus of hissing voices. Richard skidded to a stop as they reached a cross-section. "Which way?" he yelled. Merlin didn't hesitate. He pointed left. No one questioned him this time. They sprinted through the abandoned corridors, passing storefronts filled with empty shelves and shattered glass. Faded advertisements for long-forgotten brands loomed above, their models' faces warped with time and decay. Then ahead, an escalator. It stretched downward, vanishing into pitch blackness. "It's our only way down," Merlin said. Maya stared at it. "But—" A screech echoed behind them. No more time. They ran. The escalator was motionless, covered in dust and grime. Their footsteps clanged against the metal steps as they descended into darkness. Ciara kept glancing over her shoulder. She didn't dare slow down. Then, the escalator groaned. The metal trembled beneath their feet. "Oh no," Richard whispered. The escalator started moving, but not down. Upper. "Run!" Ciara screamed. They bolted, the steps grinding beneath them, dragging them in the opposite direction. Maya tripped. Ciara lunged, grabbing her wrist just as the escalator sped up. The mall was fighting them. The whispers laughed. Merlin was the first to leap off the escalator, tumbling onto the lower floor. Richard followed, barely making it before the metal steps pulled him back up. Ciara clenched her teeth and threw Maya forward, sending her crashing into Richard's arms. The escalator jerked violently. Ciara was still on it. A shadow moved in the corner of her vision. Something was reaching for her from beneath the steps. A skeletal hand burst through the gap between the escalator's metal panels. It grabbed her ankle. Cold, crushing. She screamed. Richard lunged, grabbing her arms, yanking her forward with all his strength. The escalator jerked to a stop. Then it began to collapse. Metal crunched. Sparks exploded. They hit the ground just in time as the escalator imploded, its steps twisting inward, vanishing into an impossibly deep void. Ciara gasped for breath. She felt something wet on her ankle, bruises in the shape of fingers. Maya pulled her into a shaky hug. "I thought we lost you." Ciara just nodded, unable to speak. Merlin stood, dusting himself off. His face was unreadable. "We have to keep moving." Richard turned to him, his patience snapping. "Keep moving where, Merlin? You said we're trapped." Merlin met his eyes, his voice eerily calm. "There's one way out." The silence was deafening. Ciara swallowed hard. "What way?" Merlin pointed. They turned. In front of them stood a store. Unlike the others, its glass wasn't shattered. Its neon sign still glowed faintly. The name had been scratched away, unreadable. But the doors were open, and from within, something breathed. The store stood before them, its glass doors yawning open like a mouth waiting to swallow them whole. The neon sign above it flickered weakly, the letters unrecognizable beneath layers of grime and deep scratches, as if something had violently erased its name. A stale, icy draft seeped from inside, carrying a smell that made Ciara's stomach turn, a mix of rot, dust, and something metallic. Maya shook her head violently. "We're not going in there." Richard swallowed hard. "What choice do we have?" Ciara stepped closer, peering inside. Unlike the rest of the mall, this store wasn't abandoned. It looked untouched. Shelves were still stocked. Clothing racks were neatly arranged. The checkout counters remained pristine, as if frozen in time. A mannequin stood at the front, wearing an old-fashioned suit, but its head was missing. And yet, the moment they stepped closer, the whispering stopped. Merlin exhaled slowly. "It's waiting for us." Ciara's skin prickled. "What do you mean?" Merlin didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, past the threshold into the store. The moment his foot touched the floor, the lights inside flickered on. A sharp hum filled the air as the store illuminated itself in a sickly yellow glow. The neon sign above the entrance pulsed twice, then died. Ciara's breath hitched. It had them now. The maze of aisles, one by one, they followed Merlin inside. The air was wrong, thick, humming with a presence that couldn't be seen. The shelves stretched impossibly high, their tops lost in darkness, though the store wasn't supposed to be that big. The aisles wound in unnatural directions, forming a maze that didn't match the mall's layout. This isn't normal, Richard muttered. Ciara trailed a hand along a nearby shelf. Dust clung to her fingertips. The products were ancient, cereal boxes with smiling mascots from decades ago, price tags written in currency that no longer existed. But the worst part? Some of the boxes had been opened, not by mice, by hands. Fingers had torn into the cardboard, ripping the packages open as if someone or something had been starving. Maya shuddered. I hate this place. Then, a sound, the faintest shuffle. Something moved deep within the aisles. Ciara spun toward the noise, gripping Richard's sleeve. Did you hear that? Richard nodded, his face pale. Yeah. Merlin took a slow breath. We're not alone. Maya's voice cracked. Then we should leave. But the moment she turned toward the entrance, it was gone, not closed, gone. The doorway had vanished, replaced by another aisle, stretching into infinity. Maya let out a strangled scream. No, 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 no! We just came through there! Ciara grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at her. Calm down, Richard's fist clenched. Merlin, what is this place? Merlin hesitated before speaking. It's not just a store, it's a trap. A chilling click echoed through the air. Ciara's heart dropped. The mannequin at the entrance had moved. It was no longer in its original position. It was now facing them. And it had a head, a human head, Philip's head. His eyes were open, his lips twisted into a grotesque grin, though his expression was frozen in terror. Maya screamed. The mannequin stepped down from its pedestal, a jerking, twitching motion. Unnatural. Then it ran, straight at them. The chase through the impossible. Run! Merlin roared. They tore through the aisles, knocking over shelves, sending boxes flying. The mannequin's footsteps weren't normal, a sharp clicking sound, like bone against tile. Ciara dared to glance back. The mannequin's movements were a blur. It wasn't just running, it was phasing through the shelves, vanishing and reappearing between aisles. It's cutting us off, Richard shouted. Ahead, the aisles twisted, morphing into a labyrinth. The overhead lights flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows that danced along the walls. Merlin grabbed Ciara's wrist and yanked her down an aisle filled with clothing racks. The others followed, breathing ragged. The mannequin's laugh echoed through the store. Not Philip's voice. Something else. Ciara shoved aside a rack of coats, her pulse pounding. We need to find an exit. Merlin's eyes darted upward. The ceiling. Ciara followed his gaze. The ceiling panels were loose, sagging, as if the building itself was tired of holding them. Richard nodded. If we can climb, we might find a way out. Maya grabbed a nearby shelf, scrambling onto it. Help me up! Richard boosted her and she disappeared into the shadows above. Then, the mannequin screeched. It leapt, a blur of motion. Ciara barely dodged as the thing crashed through the shelves, sending debris flying. Its head twisted, its Philip-like face cracking. Beneath the surface, something else moved. Something with too many eyes. Richard roared, swinging a metal pole at it, shattering the mannequin's head. For a moment, the thing staggered. Then, it laughed. The shattered pieces of its head pulled back together. Philip's terrified face regenerated, but now it was smiling. Merlin didn't hesitate. He grabbed Ciara and shoved her toward the shelf. Go! Ciara scrambled up, reaching for Maya's outstretched hand. Richard followed, heaving himself into the crawl space. Merlin was last. Just as he reached up, the mannequin grabbed his ankle. Merlin gasped, then turned, his face eerily calm. He smiled. Not this time. Then, he stabbed the mannequin's arm with a jagged shard of glass. The creature shrieked, releasing him. He yanked himself up, tumbling into the ceiling with the others. Darkness surrounded them. Below, the mannequin's laughter faded. For now, Maya wiped sweat from her brow. Where are we? The crawl space stretched ahead, leading into blackness. Richard groaned. We're still in the mall. Merlin's voice was quiet. Number. We're somewhere worse. Ahead in the distance, a single light flickered. and the whispering began again. The crawl space was suffocating. Dust clung to every surface, thick and undisturbed for decades. The wooden beams groaned under their weight as they crawled forward, each movement sending tiny particles into the stale air. Ciara's heart pounded. The whispering hadn't stopped. It was beneath them. The voice slithered up through the floorboards, hissing in broken tones. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have come." Maya's breathing was ragged. "Where does this lead?" Richard wiped sweat from his forehead. "It doesn't matter. We just need to keep moving." Merlin remained silent. Ciara glanced at him. His usual calmness had taken on a strange edge. His fingers clenched tightly, his expression locked in thought. Something was wrong. Ahead, the flickering light pulsed like a dying heartbeat. The passageway narrowed, the wooden beams pressing closer, as if the mall itself wanted to squeeze them out. Then a scratch. Slow, deliberate. It came from behind them. Ciara turned her head, her breath catching. Something was crawling in the dark. A distorted shape slithered just beyond the reach of their flashlight, its limbs dragging across the wood. Its breathing was wet, labored, hungry. Then a whisper. "We see you." Maya let out a strangled whimper. "Move! Move!" They scrambled forward, their hands and knees scraping against splinters, the crawl space tightening around them. The whispering followed. It didn't chase them like a person would. It bled through the walls. The chamber of forgotten things. Finally, the passage opened into a larger space. They tumbled out, gasping for air. The flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing their surroundings. It wasn't a normal room. It was a chamber of lost things. Scattered around them were items, old shoes, broken watches, children's toys covered in dust. Coats hung from rusted hooks, their fabric moth-eaten, their pockets sagging. In the center of the room stood a rusted carousel horse, its paint peeling, its eyes hollow. Maya's voice trembled. "What is this?" Merlin exhaled slowly. "A place for things people forget." Ciara shivered. "Or things that were taken." Richard nudged a small, cracked mirror with his boot. "This stuff doesn't belong here." The whispering intensified. Maya grabbed Ciara's arm. "I want to leave." Ciara opened her mouth to respond. Then the walls moved. The coat shuddered. The toys twitched. The mirror cracked further, then repaired itself. And from deep within the chamber, a voice rose. "We remember you." The children in the dark. The flashlight flickered. Then, movement. Ciara's breath hitched as shadows detached from the walls. They weren't just shapes. They were people. No children. Pale, hollow-eyed children, their faces stretched into unnatural expressions of grief. Their bodies flickered, like static on a broken screen, phasing between reality and something else. One child, a girl with tangled blonde hair and a torn dress, tilted her head. "Are you lost too?" Ciara couldn't answer. Maya was frozen in place. "Oh God." The girl took a step forward. "They let us stay here. They let us play." The others moved in unison, their blank eyes locked on the group. Richard whispered, "We need to get out of here." The girl's mouth twitched into a grin. "But it's your turn now." Then the walls collapsed inward. The hands that pull you under everything happened too fast. The coats lunged, their sleeves stretching into writhing, skeletal hands. The broken toys screeched, their glass eyes snapping open, staring in rage. The children's shadows rushed forward, their whispers turning to shrieks. Ciara screamed as something cold latched onto her wrist, dragging her toward the carousel horse. Maya fell backward, kicking at the hands clawing at her legs. "They're pulling us under!" Richard fought against the coats wrapping around his torso, tearing at the fabric as it tightened. Merlin didn't struggle. Instead, he started chanting, a low, guttural sound, like a language older than time itself. His voice vibrated through the room, shaking the walls. The shadows paused. The children let out shrill, pained cries, covering their ears. The grasping hands weakened. Merlin's voice grew louder, stronger. Then, with a final roar, he slammed his hands against the floor. The room exploded with light. The shadows shrieked as they dissolved. The hands crumbled into dust. The children's eyes filled with fear before they vanished into the darkness. Then, silence. The secret Merlin never told Ciara gasped, trembling, staring at Merlin. What was that? Merlin sat back, breathing heavily. His eyes were distant. That was, he hesitated, a way to keep them at bay. Maya's voice was raw. You knew this would happen. Merlin didn't deny it. Ciara swallowed. Who are you? For the first time, Merlin looked afraid. Richard exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. We're not done, are we? Merlin shook his head. Number? And the worst is yet to come. Ahead, a single door stood against the far wall. Unlike everything else in the room, it was new, untouched, and on it, written in fresh red paint. Food court this way. The whispering returned. We're still hungry. The door loomed before them, its fresh red lettering practically glowing in the dim light. The words food court this way felt more like a warning than a direction. Nobody moved. Ciara's throat was dry. We shouldn't open that. Merlin inhaled deeply. We don't have a choice. Richard clenched his fists. How do we know this isn't another trap? Merlin turned toward him, eyes dark. We don't. The whispering grew louder. It slithered through the cracks in the walls, filling the air like a thick fog. Maya took a step back. I don't like this. I don't like this at all. Ciara reached for the handle. It was warm. Her stomach turned. Something waited on the other side. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The rotten feast. The smell hit them first. A wave of decay. The food court stretched before them, illuminated by rows of dying fluorescent lights that flickered erratically. At first glance, it looked abandoned. Empty chairs, dust-covered counters, broken cash registers. Then Ciara's eyes adjusted. The tables weren't empty. Bodies slumped over them, their faces rotting, their mouths stuffed with mold-covered food. Plates piled high with decayed meat, congealed sauces, and flies swarming over what once might have been meals. A large gaping pit sat at the center of the food court. It pulsed. Ciara's stomach churned. What the hell is this? Maya gagged, covering her mouth. Richard took a step forward, his voice hoarse. They were eating. Merlin remained still, his face unreadable. They never stopped. Then, one of the bodies twitched. Maya let out a strangled yelp. Did you see that? Ciara grabbed her arm. Stay close. Then another body jerked upright, and another, and another. The corpses moved. They turned their heads toward the group, their milky, dead eyes staring. Their jaws cracked open, still full of food as they grinned. Then in one voice they spoke. Are you hungry? The crawling things beneath the pit at the center throbbed. The floor beneath them shifted. Something was moving underneath. Richard took a step back. We need to leave. Now the dead diners stood, their bodies twisted unnaturally, bones snapping, heads tilting too far. They smiled, wide, grotesque smiles that stretched their faces too much. Maya whimpered. No, no, no. Ciara's breath hitched as one of the corpses staggered toward them. A woman, her body bloated, her dress stained with something black. Her fingers twitched as she reached toward them. You have to eat, she whispered, her voice a wet, bubbling sound. Then the floor cracked, and the hands came. Thin, clawed fingers burst from the tiles, grasping at their ankles. Maya screamed as a hand wrapped around her leg. Ciara lunged, yanking her back, barely dodging another set of fingers that emerged from the cracks. Merlin grabbed Richard's arm. Move! The corpses lunged. Ciara swung her flashlight, smashing it against one of their heads. The skull caved in, but the thing kept coming, grinning through shattered teeth. Maya stumbled backward, her voice shrill. Where do we go? Merlin's eyes darted toward the far side of the food court, a metal door. Our only way out. Richard was already running. Go! The things that lurked below. The ground beneath them bulged, like something massive was rising. As they ran, Ciara risked a glance back. The pit at the center of the food court had opened. Something was climbing out. A mouth. Too many teeth, too many tongues, slick and writhing. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything that should exist. The corpses rushed forward, their movements inhumanly fast. The whispering became a scream. Ciara reached the metal door first. She grabbed the handle, locked. "Number no, no, no!" Richard slammed against it. "Help me!" Merlin pressed his palm to the door, murmuring something under his breath. The metal groaned. Behind them, the pit creature loomed, its body half risen, tentacles dripping with black fluid. The corpses wailed, their bodies melting into the floor, dragged toward the pit like sacrifices. Then the door burst open. Merlin shoved them through. "Go!" They tumbled inside, and the door slammed shut. The silence of the forgotten. They collapsed onto the cold, dark floor. The whispering was gone. For the first time since entering the mall, everything was silent. Maya's breathing was erratic. What was that?" Merlin wiped his face, his expression grim. "It was waiting for us." Ciara's voice shook. "What is this place?" Merlin exhaled slowly. "A place that shouldn't exist." Richard sat up. "Are we safe here?" Merlin looked toward the dark hallway ahead of them. "No." Something scratched in the distance, a slow, deliberate sound. Ciara clenched her fists. "Then where the hell do we go now?" Merlin's voice was a whisper. "Deeper." Ahead, the darkness pulsed, and then something moved. The air was thick, too thick. As they stood at the entrance of the dark hallway, Ciara swore the walls inhaled. A slow, deep pull, like the mall itself was breathing. Maya gripped Ciara's arm, her voice unsteady. "I don't want to go in there." Merlin stared into the darkness. His face was unreadable, but his fingers twitched, anxious, calculating. Richard exhaled sharply. "We don't have a choice." The whispering hadn't stopped. It was softer now, but more deliberate, calling, inviting. Merlin took the first step. The others followed, their movements hesitant, their bodies tense. The walls narrowed around them. The deeper they went, the more the air felt wrong. Too humid, too thick. Then Ciara noticed it. The walls were damp, not with water, with something warm. Maya ran her fingers along the surface, then jerked away with a scream. Her hand was red. The walls weren't just damp, they were bleeding. The corridor of unfinished faces. Ciara's breathing hitched as the flashlight beam flickered. Something was etched into the walls. At first it looked like random grooves, scratches in the flesh-like surface. Then she realized they were faces, hundreds of them, twisted, unfinished faces pushed through the walls, their features warped like someone had tried to mold them but never finished. Eyes without pupils, mouths stretched too wide. Some were moving, their lips quivered, their empty eyes twitched. Then, in a voice that wasn't a voice, the walls spoke. "You don't belong here." The whispering turned to laughter. Maya choked back a sob. "Make it stop!" Richard grabbed her wrist. "Keep moving!" Ciara forced herself forward, ignoring the sensation of the walls pulsing. Breathing. The hallway stretched longer. The air grew thicker. The faces in the walls grinned. Then, a hand shot out. The thing that reached. The hand was wrong. It wasn't human. It twisted as it emerged, its fingers too long, its skin raw and pulsing. It grabbed Richard's ankle. He fell. His scream was cut short as the hand dragged him toward the wall. Ciara lunged, grabbing his. "No!" Richard struggled, his eyes wild. "It's pulling me in!" The wall split open, a grotesque, wet gash in reality, like a mouth trying to swallow him. Maya and Merlin grabbed hold of him, yanking with everything they had. The hand tightened. Richard's skin turned pale. His veins darkened. Then, Merlin screamed something in a language none of them understood. The hand twitched. It released. Richard gasped, crawling backward, shaking violently. The wall sealed shut. The whispering stopped. The hallway went silent. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Richard spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "It was inside my head." The room with no exit. They ran, fast, not looking back. The hallway twisted, turned, stretched in unnatural ways, but they kept running. Finally, they burst through a doorway, slamming it shut behind them. Their breaths were ragged. Their bodies trembled. The flashlight flickered. Ciara's stomach dropped. They were in another room, a massive, empty room. No doors, no windows, no way out. Maya's eyes filled with panic. Where the hell are we? Merlin ran his fingers along the walls. This isn't real. Richard clenched his fists. What the hell does that mean? Merlin turned toward them, his face ashen. This room wasn't here before. The air shifted. Something whispered in the dark. Then, the lights went out. The lights died. The room was swallowed in darkness. Ciara's breath hitched. Her fingers clenched into fists, her heart hammering against her ribs. A whisper slithered through the air. You were never meant to leave, Maya whimpered. Richard muttered curses under his breath. Merlin was silent. Ciara flicked the flashlight on. Nothing. The light didn't penetrate the darkness. It was as if the void itself devoured it. Then, a sound. Not a whisper. Not footsteps. Something breathing. Something enormous. The floor beneath them vibrated as the breath grew closer. A deep, guttural chuckle echoed through the void. Ciara swallowed hard. Merlin, what the hell is this? His voice was flat. It's awake. Richard's voice cracked. What's awake? Merlin turned toward them, his expression unreadable. The mall isn't abandoned. Maya stiffened. What? Merlin exhaled slowly. It was never abandoned. It was sealed. The whispering turned into a chorus. 1,000 voices, crying, laughing, screaming. The walls rippled. Then, a pair of glowing eyes snapped open in the dark. The thing beneath the mall. A figure rose from the darkness. It wasn't human. It wasn't a creature. It was the mall itself. Its body was stitched together from walls, floors, broken mannequins, rotting flesh, and shattered glass. Its mouth stretched across its entire form, filled with teeth that didn't belong. It didn't move. It watched. Ciara's stomach churned. Oh my God! Maya was shaking. Richard froze. Then, the creature spoke. Its voice wasn't one voice. It was hundreds, thousands, all speaking at once. Welcome home! The floor split open. The void beneath them screamed. Run or die, the ground collapsed. The mall was pulling them in. Ciara lunged, grabbing Maya before she fell. Richard stumbled, barely catching himself. Merlin was already moving. Run! The walls twisted, stretching, growing mouths that grinned. Limbs crawled from the floors. The faces in the walls wept. The air turned thick with rot. They ran. The mall shrieked. The door they had entered from was gone. No way back, no way forward. Then, Ciara saw it. A flickering neon sign in the distance. Exit. It pulsed, glitching, flickering. Like it wasn't really there. Richard's breath was ragged. Is that real? Merlin didn't answer. The thing behind them moved. The mall itself shifted. It was closing in. The last door. The exit sign dimmed. The mall was swallowing it. Ciara's chest burned. She pushed forward, feet pounding against the shifting ground. Maya screamed. Richard was falling behind. Merlin stretched out a hand. Faster! The mall roared. The walls caved inward, arms and faces reaching for them. Ciara dove. The exit sign flashed one last time, and then they were outside, the silent parking lot. The night air was cold, too cold. Ciara's lungs ached. She turned. The mall was gone. Nothing but an empty parking lot behind them. No building, no walls, no sign that anything had ever been there. Maya sobbed. Richard was on his knees, gasping. Merlin stood still, his gaze dark. Ciara's voice shook. What the hell just happened? Merlin's expression was unreadable. They let us go. Ciara frowned. Why? Merlin exhaled. Because we were never supposed to make it out. Then behind them, the whispering returned, and from the shadows of the parking lot, a neon sign flickered. Mall open 24/7. The end. That was the final Generation 8. What did you think of the story? Would you dare step into the abandoned mall? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying tales on Forever Wild Stories.